When I was younger, I really wanted to win the lottery. It wasn't like I wanted a large sum of money or anything, like $1 billion. I wanted to win for modest reasons. I wanted to win so that I could have an equal chance of getting a quality education. See, I was born in Asmara, Eritrea, a country you might know as Eritrea, where your quality of education is genuinely determined by whether or not you win a lottery. If you were lucky enough to be picked, then you would attend a private school, where your education was not only thoroughly funded, but opportunities seemed limitless. But if you were less lucky, then you would attend a public school, where resources were scarce and opportunities were rare. And because I'm so lucky, out of all three of my siblings, I got into a public school. And if you can't tell which one I am, I'm the one with the gigantic forehead on the left. From my perspective at the time, public school wasn't all that bad for me. I had a great set of friends, as you can see, great teachers, but something that remained evident throughout my time in Eritrea was the lack of resources. See, my classmates and I not only had to share books, but go as far as sharing paper, because we simply did not have enough. But even with those hindrances aside, my classmates and I remained resilient. Throughout my time in Eritrea, one thing that I remember for sure is our hunger to learn, our constant need to excel and do great. But my appreciation for education and the institution itself isn't simply derived from my time in Eritrea, but a combination of every place that I've lived. First Eritrea, then Sudan, then Ethiopia, and finally, the United States. During my time in Sudan, I only remember 3 things, okay? I never went to school, I only attended church, and it was boiling hot. But my most hard-hitting memories come from my time in Ethiopia. I spent a total of 8 months in Ethiopia, and as you'd expect, I never went to school. But what I do remember is that when the school hours would be going by, kids my age and younger would be sitting on the sides of the streets. And that's when I realized there was no opportunity, there was no chance for change, and that these kids were simply not going to school. And that's when it dawned on me. I was not better than anybody else. I was simply given more resources, a better hand at life. If those kids had the opportunities that I do, they too would succeed. Having experienced what it's like to have an education, even if it is low quality in Eritrea, and what it's like to go without it in Sudan and Ethiopia, taught me how important education is, not just on a mass level, but to the individual themselves. That's why coming to the United States for me was just a great shocker, a big shock for me. For one, I could not speak the language for the life of me. Speaking English was my biggest struggle. For one, I had to go from speaking Tigrinya to speaking English. And for context, this is Tigrinya. And just in case you don't know, this is English. But as you'd expect, my biggest adjustment for me was school. There's a stark contrast between schools in the United States and schools in Eritrea. In Eritrea, there was a heavy emphasis on school. We didn't see school as a chore or a routine. We saw it as a catalyst for a better life, something that we worked towards constantly to not only make our families proud, but to make the most of what we had. Even though those values are still instilled with me today, my appreciation for education is derived from 2 experiences: being an immigrant daughter, and because I have dreams of my own. See, my parents came to the United States in their late 30s, meaning that they had already established their life in Eritrea. They had already gone to college, they had jobs, and they had a community that supported them. My father was a teacher, and my mother worked as a secretary at a network company. And coming to the United States meant giving up all of that, sacrificing it all so that my siblings and I could have a chance at a better life. So for the longest time, I felt like I owed my parents a debt, that if I didn't do well in school or constantly strive for success, that they would think back and think, bringing Betsy to the United States was a mistake, that they would see me as a failure. But those thoughts were simply my own, because my parents constantly repeated to me, "Betty, everything we do is just for you." But even with that message alone, it didn't set in for me until I began high school, when I really began to think about what I wanted to do with my life when I graduated. And I settled on medical school, and yes, that was my own personal choice. My parents did not make me say that. When I finally realized what I wanted to do with my life, and what education really meant to me, I no longer saw it as a way to pay back my parents by succeeding in school or constantly striving myself in unhealthy ways. But I realized that I could do both. I could show gratitude to my parents, but also follow my own dreams without feeling pressured. That's when I began to look around at my environment, at my peers, and I started comparing it to my time in Eritrea. And I saw how different the cultures were. In the United States, K through 12 is mandatory. It's not a choice. But from every other country that I've lived in, K through 12 is not mandatory. Kids my age and younger, even my peers in Eritrea, had to quit school, whether it be to work as child laborers on farms or factories, because they had obligations to their families. Even though we'd like to say that education is right, reality shows differently. It should be, but that's not what we see. That's why we have to take time to accept this privilege, to understand just how important and crucial education plays in the life of children, in the life of every single one of us. Whether you like it or not, education will always have value. The value of education isn't derived from how we view it or the admiration that we give it, but rather the knowledge that it serves us. But time after time, I've seen my peers let opportunities pass by, whether it be out of fear or the feeling that another chance will come by. But I know all too well that chances are not promised, and opportunities will not come by that easily. That's why we should each take the time to not only appreciate education, but to utilize our resources, not because others have less, but because we owe it to ourselves and the people that support us, to make the most of what we have and to the best of what we can. I owe it to myself and the people who support me to do well in life, because they've given me a chance to imagine a life that I never could have had. So take the time to appreciate education and understand how much work that it took to get you where you are now.